Power and ethics in business communications. Do ethical responsibilities change in relation to a person's position within a company or organization? What factors potentially change ethical responsibilities in business communications? A couple of them could be positional power, another one could be influence. Positional power is power obtained by an individual because of an elevation in status within a company. Influence is more of the earning of respect of one's peers within a company and the influence one has on their actions because of the amount of respect one has earned. Positional power. As mentioned before, positional power is obtained influence due to an elevated position within an organization. People within that organization respect positional power in order to avoid some kind of consequences, typically. Positional power alone is the weakest form of influence. And I'm not saying all people in positions of power operate off of positional power alone. Some of them actually earn the respect of their subordinates and their peers and are, positive leaders because of that. But not everybody in a position of management operates from that perspective. Some of them, their only power is due to the position that they're in and due to the enforcement of potential consequences if people weren't to follow. Um, Examples of positional power are management, executives, ownership, and potential stakeholders, both primary and secondary. What effect does positional power have on ethics in business communications? Positional power, like many other forms of power, can be abused. The more positional power a single individual holds, the greater the potential consequences of abusing it. And abuse of power can have severe consequences on a company or organization, not just within the organization, but also potentially legal consequences if too much abuse of power is enacted. What are some of the ways that positional power can be abused? Intimidation, humiliation, and coercion. These three typically come from a person in position of management directed at a subordinate in order for some kind of personal gain, whether that be, unearned acclimates or a raise or just because they're, power hungry and like to be in that position of power. The last one being misrepresentation or deception. This would come into play if a person in position of power has a potential conflict of interests and they're trying to sabotage the company in order for a personal gain because of that conflict of interest. What are the potential consequences of abusing positional power? The first way is it could adversely affect the company's financial standing. Let's say, for instance, that the accountant of a company had a conflict of interests. Let's say he owned stock in a competing company. And he decided to falsely report the financial position of the company to decision makers. And based upon the false information, the decision makers of this company decided to expand into new regions, open up new locations, and purchase more equipment when they didn't have the financial means to do so. This could potentially cripple the company for expanding too fast when they shouldn't have because of the false financial reporting. The second potential consequence is it could adversely affect the morale of the employees. This would come into play if somebody in a position of management was consistently abusing their positional power and making the employees feel inferior to them and not treating their subordinates with respect. This could lead to a loss of employees all at once and could cripple the operations of the company. And the last potential consequence is it could adversely affect the image of the organization. Let's say, for instance, if the marketing director decided to make claims about a new product that turned out to be false, and a secondary stakeholder within the company publicly called the company out. That could really adversely affect the image of the organization, not just for this specific product, but for all of its products. So, what are the increased responsibilities with an elevated position of power? People who are in positions of power in an organization have a responsibility to use their power wisely and not abuse their powers. The use of power from all people in positions of power should be used to benefit the stakeholders in the company standing at all times, not for selfish interests. People with greater forms of positional power are a greater representation of the company and should act in a manner that reflects positively on the organization. People who hold a greater representation of the company should be held to higher standards of ethical communication than those who are not as great of a representation of the company.
So far, we've talked about some of the ethical responsibilities and how they can change depending on who the individual is within a company and the influence that they have. The abuse of power generally goes up for higher positions because they're entrusted with more. They have more opportunities for abuse, and they have a whole lot less oversight. So that abuse of power can be manifested in a lot of different ways, and the consequences for the situations do depend on the severity and the intricacies. But generally, the moral and ethical standards and the expectations come from the highest levels, so it is a trickle down to instill that within a company or an organization.